It's time now for the Todd Leonard Show. Leave those negative stories behind as we focus on the positive and hear from those who give back and help others. Let's start your day with some inspirational stories. Now, here's your host, Todd Leonard.
Good morning, everyone. We have another outstanding show today. I have a great honor having my friend Steven Levy, a local philanthropist. We're going to go on an exciting journey, a journey of giving back that is really fascinating. He was a Wall Street wizard. In 2005, he had a change in his life situation, and he's been on a miraculous journey of just giving back and helping, especially with the Jewish Community Foundation of Greater Metro West. Good morning, Steven.
Good morning, Todd. It's good to be here.
Thank you, sir. You know, I have to tell the listeners, I met Steven a few years ago on a golf course, believe it or not. We both won a raffle at Elite Toma, and it was kind of interesting.
Todd, I'm sorry, we didn't win. We paid for that opportunity.
That's true. Well, that's a good way to look at it. I never won a raffle, Steve, but it was interesting because I got to meet Steven a few years ago on the golf course. He's a heck of a golfer. In fact, he birdied a hole, and I felt bad. We never got him a drink after the round, but I'll make that up to you, Steven. So I wanted to ask you some basic questions, Steve, because a lot of the listeners don't know too much about your background. So I want to go back in time. I'm always interested in people's journey. This is the show, the journey of giving back. So where were you born and raised?
So I was born in Brooklyn, and basically spent my first 18 years, never a summer in Brooklyn. I was always out of the city. Went to school upstate New York, and after 6 years at Rensselaer Polytechnic, I got married, and we lived in Boston and Chicago, and then we moved to New Jersey in 1986.
Right. And, you know, getting ready for the show, I know you've been blessed with your lovely wife, Bina. And from what I recall, you met her in college.
I did. I met her my freshman year of college. She was actually dating somebody else named Steven Levy, so I actually went out with her best friend. Funny story, but not germane to this. We stayed really, really good friends, and then she went off to another college, but she was up in Troy, New York, and then we became great friends, and then we got romantically involved her freshman year, my sophomore year, and then that was it.
Rest is history. Well, God bless her and your wonderful family. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, I'm always fascinated about how people get in the seat of wanting to give back and role models in your life. So let's talk about your parents. What kind of influence did your parents have on you?
My parents were amazing role models, Todd. They never really gave us lectures about what the right thing to do was. They always did the right thing, and they modeled it, and they were examples. They were active in their local community, whether it was in our synagogue, or other social services. I always saw them giving back and leading, not just participating, but leading, stepping up to be a president of this, or something like that. And, you know, they were just great models. And, you know, growing up, you know, I was okay. Never wanted for anything. They were both public school teachers. So we didn't live this amazingly rich life. But we never really wanted for anything. And somehow they always gave back. And so they were great models. And I'd say the same thing with my wife. You know, Bina's parents, the same kind of thing. In their community, they were always, you know, ones to give back. And it taught me a wonderful lesson, which is, you know, your time is just as valuable as your money. You know, a lot of people have money and they give, and that's wonderful. But, you know, it's the people who have time that is sometimes even more dear.
Well, no, that's one of the reasons why I was so fascinated, because I was blessed with incredible parents, too, and they led by example. And I know for the listeners, it's really important, for the parents especially, because the kids do watch as you go through life. So I know we were talking a little bit in advance of the show about going to bingo with your parents. So, you know, I actually have to tell you, I kind of like bingo. It's a little funny, though, because you're kind of sitting around. Usually people are a little older than you. But what was bingo like as a kid?
So my parents were involved with bingo as a fundraiser for their synagogue. And it's funny because the synagogue is, let's say, in Sheepshead Bay. And they had a bingo hall, which they got to use in downtown Brooklyn. So we would either drive or take the subway there. And it was a very different crowd. And it was very different. I mean, it was really fascinating. And I would help with, selling boards. I was never allowed to pull the balls, call the numbers, but you just sit there and you watch and listen, I'm a big fan of bingo. And they did some wonderful things. They raised a lot of money with that and did good things with it.
It was funny. So I was getting ready this morning, and on my feed on Facebook, my great friend Jay Friedman, it's his birthday today, so shout out to Jay Friedman. But the funny thing was, we were on vacation, a bunch of my golfing buddies, and it was horrible weather in Puerto Plata. It was like a monsoon. I have no idea. We actually played bingo. You got to realize we're like guys, maybe 35, 38 years old. We're hanging out playing bingo, and my buddy wanted a bottle of Brugal, so it was good. So let's talk a little bit about, I know education was really important to you. When did you realize the importance of education, Steve?
Well, as I mentioned, Todd, my parents were public school teachers. And, if I look back on my life, they made a big decision when I was in 7th grade. New York City public schools were on strike. And they took me out and sent me to a private school because after 2 months, they were very involved with their union, which is another aspect of, something that created an impression in my life. But they took me out and said, Steve, you need to go to school. We can't keep you out. I was going to Sheepshead Bay and fishing off the pier with my best friend at the time, on a daily basis. Didn't catch anything, but that's a whole nother story. And so, they said, we need to make a change because getting a good education is so important to you. Ironically, the strike was settled 2 weeks later, but, that was a different story. And, just watching them and understanding and going into their classroom. My father was a shop teacher. He taught much more than metalworking and electronics. He taught these kids to be good people. It was in Coney Island. So it was a very mixed, very diverse class. But, these kids, he taught them how to be good people, how to respect each other. And as a result, this was during a time, I'm not sure if you remember this, Welcome Back, Kotter. So, my father was like Mr. Kotter. And, I'd go into the classroom and I would see how these kids, talk to them. And, I'll throw my best Brooklyn accent in here, but, hey, Mr. Levy, can I come in your class? And my father would go, Anthony, where are you supposed to be now? He goes, in English, but I don't like the English. He goes, well, I think you need it, So there was an amazing respect for him as a teacher. My mother was a 9th grade algebra teacher. Never raised her voice. Never needed to. This is in Bensonhurst. So, you got some tough kids in Bensonhurst, and she never raised her voice. And she basically got the respect from these kids that said, I will help you, and especially it was 9th grade, for those of you who remember, I'm not sure if it's still there, in New York City, you got to take these Regents exams. She promised her kids, you work with me, I will get you to pass your Regents exam. And she taught them whatever tricks they needed, 100% for those kids who wanted to work with her. So that was probably what formed it. I went on, got a bachelor's degree in engineering and an MBA and most of a master's in engineering. But it was really, really important to me. And my wife, feels the same way. So when we had kids, there wasn't any question about how important it was for us to send our kids to a really, really good school with the values that we like. And that's how we're involved, besides the Jewish Community Foundation, with the Gottesman Academy. And we've been involved with that school for as long as we've been here, for more than 30 years. Wonderful.
I mean, your stories, you just get warmed up, Stephen. So one of the things that fascinated me, too, in getting ready for the show is your background in the world of finance. And in getting ready, I saw you were touted as one of the top analysts really in the world for, the many years you served at the Lehman Brothers Company. I want to go, though, first to, from what I recall, you were with AT&T for about 6 years, right?
Yes. Right. Yeah, I was, when I got out of college, with an engineering degree and a business degree, I said, I can't really be a good manager or a business leader unless I went into a management development program. So AT&T had a great program. They might still have it. And I was there for 6 years and, taste tested different spaces, but learned how to become a good manager of people.
Right. And So you were with AT&T for about 6 years, and what happened? What made you decide perhaps you were going to go in another direction?
Yeah, I think the two things that happened. One, it became very clear to me I wasn't going to be the CEO or the chairman of AT&T. So, early in my career, that became clear to me. So that was in the back of my head. And then a friend of mine left AT&T, went to Wall Street, and he became an analyst. And then he approached me one day. He said, "Steve, do you want to come to Wall Street?" I go, "I don't know why." He goes, "Well, you can make a lot of money." I said, "Okay, I'll talk to somebody." And, ended up, he introduced me to this wonderful mentor of mine, Alice Brady. May she rest in peace. She just died a couple of months ago. And, she took me under her wing, brought me in. At the time, it was a small investment boutique called Hambrecht & Quist, and spent 9 months. I mean, literally 9 months before I published a research report. And I remember going through my first drafts, and slowly the piles of the draft, it got above table length because I just kept piling up. And I would give it to her, and she'd give it back to me. Said, "No, you got to do this." And because of her, I became committed to do the same kind of mentoring to whomever worked for me. So that launched my career, and I was at H&Q for 8 years. I think something like that. And then I moved to a few other large investment banks, and fortunately, did well. But it was all based on, what I had learned before this. And
so you talk about mentorship, and that's another thing that I think is vitally important as part of everybody's journey to give back, is to lift others up and use your knowledge and pass it on to other people. Because if you don't pass it on, no one's going to benefit from your education and your experience. So to be an analyst, I'm assuming it's a lot of different skills that have to kind of come together. Did you kind of just keep on working at it? Was it a natural fit for you?
I would say that this is to be a really good securities analyst on Wall Street. So, and for those of you who are not familiar, this is an analyst who does research on companies and stocks and industries, and then writes research reports and makes recommendations. So when your broker or investment manager says buy ABC Corporation or XYZ Corporation or sell ABC or XYZ, it's because an analyst has done the research. So I always broke down the job as 3 parts. One, you're an investigative reporter. So you're digging, you're finding information, you're putting this puzzle together. The second part is you're analyzing it. After you collect all the information, what does it mean? And the third part is you have to communicate. So if you're really good at the first two and you can't speak English and you can't talk to people and you can't explain your ideas, you're probably not going to be successful. And the trick of being a really, really good analyst is you want to put that puzzle together with the fewest number of pieces possible. Because if you wait till the whole puzzle's put together, everybody knows it, right? And it's already reflected in the stock price. So it's investigative reporter, it's analysis, and then it's communications. And, those are all skills that you need to keep working on. New ways of finding out information, getting new sources. And obviously, as the world of securities changes, there are rules in terms of getting inside information and that kind of stuff. But, it was really those 3 things. And I would argue that those are skills that can be transferred to volunteer positions or other businesses, and I've certainly tried to do that.
Right. I also know that because of the tremendous amount of knowledge you acquired over the many years, you really were in demand as a top analyst, but also it was in the telecommunications genre, right, in that area.
Yeah. So having come out of AT&T, I knew how networks are built. I knew how networks were purchased, network services were purchased, and that gave me a great start in terms of working with institutional investors, large mutual fund, explaining it, and just being able to explain why a company introduces a product that does this. Why is that important? Is it important? I mean, they might say it's important, but if it's really not important, then they're probably not going to get the sales, which means you probably don't want to own the stock. So being able to explain how a telecommunications network was built was very, very valuable.
Yeah, I was just interested because you picked a sector in the financial analyst world, which was kind of like a transition from AT&T,
yeah,
and you did it for so many years. So with Lehman Brothers in 2005, I always want to know people, everybody's on a different trajectory in life. We all have trials and tribulations. I learned in my life when I get my butt kicked, I learned so much from the experience. I come out a better person. In the middle of it, it's not too much fun, though. So what happened in 2005, around September of 2005?
Yeah, so what happened in September 2005, to answer your question very directly, is that I got let go from Lehman Brothers. Wonderful thing. Didn't feel that good at the time, but that actually started almost 2 years before that when I went to my research director and said, you know what, I think I'm near the end here. And so we tried to find another position at Lehman Brothers, and then it just didn't go well. So he basically said, look, we don't need you anymore. Listen, I've never been rejected from a high school, from a college, from an MBA program. I have a perfect record, and here I am getting let go, right at the peak of my career. And it didn't feel good. But you know what? I actually had other things going on at the time. Unfortunately, my father, who I looked up to, had just been diagnosed with ALS, and we knew he didn't have a lot of time. So I tried to turn it around and say, listen, this is a blessing. My last 2 months, I spent a lot of time with him, and his passing coincided with me being retired from Wall Street. But it also gave me enough time to plan my next career, if you will. And at the time, I looked around and I said, you know what, there are a lot of people who don't think being a public company director is a good idea. I said, there's probably some merit. If everybody's going to the left, sometimes you want to look to the right. And so I looked into it, and I had some good contacts after almost 20 years on Wall Street, and I lined up a couple of director jobs. I did my research. I knew that if you do a good job as a director, you're legally fine. There's a certain amount of diligence. And I began that career. It also opened me up in terms of being able to manage my time. I mean, the biggest issue I had on Wall Street was time wasn't mine.
Yeah. So, Steve, and I'm so sorry about the loss of your beloved father. I can think back to when we were talking, in advance of the show, when my dad sadly had pancreatic cancer, and I spent some incredibly important time near the end of his life. And I remember just, how valuable that was. I would just be with my dad. And I never will forget, at least I had the opportunity. I know with you, I had the same situation with your dad, who you were telling me he was playing like tennis at like age 79, few hours a day. And then all of a sudden, he got clobbered with ALS, sadly.
February, he was still playing 2 hours of tennis down in Florida. And then all of a sudden, and it's so rare for somebody at that age to get ALS. The doctors down in Florida just hadn't seen somebody like that. So he got diagnosed in April on his birthday. Actually, we had to pull some strings. He has a wonderful friend who, unfortunately, his wife had ALS, so we had some contacts. And, he faced it so bravely, and for my sister and myself, and I'm sure the rest of my family, this was just, such a courageous way to approach this. He says, I'm 80 years old. I'm not going on a respirator. I've had an amazing life. And as much as I was angry that he's only 80, we were blessed. He knew his grandchildren. My grandchildren, my children knew him. And they knew all their grandparents. So he set another wonderful example as he was exiting this world. But yeah, that was, it was an interesting time, and certainly something that was formative in my life.
Well, how old were you at the time, Steve?
Let's see. So I was 50.
50, yes.
I'm not even 50. I was 49.
Right. Yeah. I know when I lost my dad too, it definitely changed my life in so many ways. But similarly, he was so brave and so courageous, and he still gave us hope, because that's one of the things in life. You always have to have hope no matter what your situation is. I draw on that today to see the strength he exuded and able to lift everybody else around him, even though we knew he was very, very ill. It made us kind of cope with it better.
I'll give you one more interesting thing that I didn't realize till later. I always judged my age as how close I was to my father. And that gap never changed. So I didn't feel like I was getting older. So when he's 79 and I am whatever, I have to do the math, it was always the gap between us. And then all of a sudden, he passes away. And I said, oh no, I'm getting old now. Because I was never old, because I was always looking at him, and he was so active, bouncing the kids on his lap and playing tennis and calling me up. I had a great tennis game, and I'll say the other thing that was really, really, formative, and both of my parents, but, my father in particular, I felt like every night he would come in and say goodnight to me and tell me how proud he was of me. And he had no idea what I did that day. It didn't matter to him. He just said, I'm proud. And he goes, Steve, or Stevie, he goes, you can be whatever you want as long as you put your mind to it. And, I heard that 1,000 times. Well, it sinks in after a while. Right. I said, okay, you know what? I can be anything I want as long as I put my mind to it. And it's a great, great lesson for kids.
So in 2005, you went through a metamorphosis. You lost your dad. You kind of got to get yourself resituated in life and what direction you're going. Obviously, you're very, very intelligent. And as a result, you did your research. You started to get on these boards. And when did it give you the opportunity to give back more to the community? Because one of the beautiful things about a guy like you, Steve, is you're very, very talented and very successful. But you've also been able to transition into the world of the community. And not that saying you weren't before, but what happened in that period around that time where, despite tremendous adversity, you got more involved with the community?
First of all, thank you for the kind words. I am really blessed to be able to give back. And the reason I can give back is not just because I did well financially on Wall Street, but I now had time. And so somebody in our Jewish community came to me and said, look, one of our organizations is having some financial issues. We could use your perspective. So I'm a financial analyst, right? And I have some good sense of business. So I sat on a task force, but I couldn't say that. Yeah, I couldn't say yes to anything before this because I was working incredible hours and I was very, very protective of the time that I wasn't working for my family. Of course, they would argue that it wasn't enough, but, in my own warped sense, I thought I had a very balanced life. But I knew that I couldn't do volunteer work. But once I retired, I knew I had the time. And then somebody approached me and said, Steve, we could use your skill set. We could use your experiences. And then, that started. And I was sitting on the investment committee for a Jewish Community Foundation for a few years. And then I realized there's a lot of other Wall Street all-stars in our community who are probably a lot better than me. So I stepped off of that. And then I started taking on other jobs, as a volunteer. It's just, it worked out because of the time. Again, this theme of time being so precious, and so valuable. But it was back then that I had the time and I could give back. I'm also not the type to sit back. You mentioned, playing golf. I love play golf. I played golf all over the world. I did one trip around the world where I played, 3 times in Singapore and Australia, and I came back 6 days. I did a round the world trip visiting Lehman Brothers clients, and but I never joined a country club. And I could certainly afford it while I was on Wall Street. But I said, I can't give the time up, right? The weekends were precious for my family. So, I never joined a country club. People ask me when I go out and play golf, how come you never joined a club? And I said, well, when I was working, I didn't have the time. And now I got other things to do, but, time was the killer, but then it was also what turned me around as a volunteer because I now had it.
Yeah, so, this is one thing. I work really hard. I know, anybody in your position, especially on Wall Street, putting a crazy amount of hours in. And this always goes back to life's mysteries, the balance, right? You want to do really well in your career, but you also have family obligations, and it's always a tug of war. Any advice for the listeners? Like, how do you try to find that balance so that it's a happy medium, which I know is always elusive?
Yeah, if you ask me, as I said before, I thought I had really good balance. You should talk to your family members and make sure that their perceptions of how much time you're giving them, you're only going to go through this life once, and you're hopefully only going to have this one family. And, I kind of very proudly say I didn't miss too many important events. I still do remember once where I chose to go to a trip to Texas to see some really important clients, and it was my anniversary in August. And the sales guy I was with, he goes, because he heard me talking on the phone with my wife, and he goes, "Why are you here? Why didn't you tell me? We would have changed this." And it was, it was a little thing, but I said, you're right. You got to get your priorities right. Very often you will find, I hope you work for an organization that has family as a priority, and that's something I would look at. And if they don't, then they don't understand the value of community. And there's a lot of companies that focus on we got to give back to our community. Well, you got to give back to your employees too, and you want to have an organization that is sensitive and family oriented. Doesn't mean you can't work really, really hard, but if you need to take time off in the afternoon to go to some taekwondo testing event because it's important to your 8-year-old, and then they allow you to come back in the evening and work, and that's fine, right? I mean, so I would look for an organization that's pretty flexible, but you got to keep double checking with the people that you think you're spending time with and make sure that their priorities are matching up with yours.
We were talking also again in advance of the show about loyalty and about, your team around you and how important that is, because you obviously were wildly successful in the business world. You have some kind of thoughts about the importance of that relationship with your team?
Yeah, and so it goes back to, as I said, this woman, Alice Brady, who brought me into Wall Street, and she gave me so much, not just of her time, of her wisdom, but she was this incredible mentor that I committed myself that anybody who worked for me, I would make sure that they are successful. And I'm loyal to them, and I took care of them. We go back to the Lehman Brothers story, 2 years before I was let go. Really sounds strange. I always say 2 years before I retired, but, the reality is they let me go, and it worked out just fine. I knew that I was going to change positions, so one of the things I did is I made sure the people who worked for me got placed in other positions. So I'm still in touch with, 4 of the people who work for me very, very closely. We consider them dear friends. Little strange as they get older and, they're in their 40s and one maybe, 50. And I'm starting to feel old.
You look great, though, Steve.
Thanks. But I thought it was really important to teach them the same way that I got taught and to help them be successful. And it wasn't a zero-sum game. They could be successful and, didn't take anything away. And I always tried to give them credit. I mean, I was very happy to be the team leader of a very successful team versus being the successful superstar. And, it's to me, the big success was that these people went off on their own and became successful professionals and successful people.
Right. One of the things that we were also talking about is how you treat people, how that impacts their lives, but also your life and the respect. Why is that important to you, Steve?
So, we we'll go back to my parents, right? And the model that they set and the things that they told me were important, to look at people and, it didn't make a difference what they looked like, what the color of their skin was, what their background is, that, to respect them until they gave you a reason not to, and not to assume because of the way somebody talked or the way somebody walked or the way they looked that they were less valuable, and that people can contribute no matter what. And the trick was to find a way for them to maximize their value. So, it really goes back there. And then, I sit on, I'm the chairman of a publicly traded company, and I'm very proud of the fact that half of our directors are females. Not just because somebody mandated it, but it really does bring different perspectives. There are many times that one of our women directors will say something and go, okay, I really wasn't looking at it that way, right?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, about having a very broad base different folks of different nationalities and background and sexes that are important. We're going to be back in 30 seconds and talk about the Jewish Community Foundation. It's been giving back, strengthening the community for over 50 years.
The Todd Leonard Show is sponsored by the Leonard Foundation, whose mission is to support the children and families who are battling pediatric cancer and those in need of food and assistance, women's shelters, and other important social services in the community. They also proudly support those fighting pancreatic cancer. They feel it's vitally important to help those in need in our amazing community when they need us the most. Please join them in extending a helping hand and go to leonardcharity.org and donate now. Together, we can touch many lives.
So welcome back. We're with Steven Levy, once again, an incredible guest. And I want to talk about, the Jewish Community Foundation of Greater Northwest. I know that's near and dear to your heart. And I just, before we went on the break, they've been giving back, strengthening the community for over 50 years. And that's a long time. That's a half a century. And you put things in perspective, it shows it's a very solid, very, very vitally important organization. What made you gravitate to the Jewish Community Foundation as part of your interest to give back?
So the Jewish Community Foundation of Greater Metro West, JCF, is part of our Jewish Federation in this community. It goes from Newark out to Sussex County. And it was founded, as you said, when it was founded, it was basically the financial arm of our federation. It was there to hold endowments for people who've been giving on an annual basis, and then maybe they have a bequest, so that their legacy continues. We've evolved tremendously since that point. We now manage almost $800 million in fund assets, and these are people who have donor advised funds, so we help them with their philanthropic giving. But we're really set up to help out a lot of the Jewish organizations. And by the way, a lot of these organizations are not, focused just on Jews. So we have an organization called JVS, which does vocational training, and it doesn't matter who you are, they want to help you. And one of the fundamentals of our organization is we need to lift up the entire community. So it's social services, it's education. So what I liked about it was I knew what the end result was. I knew the organizations that were beneficiaries of these funds, and the Jewish Community Foundation really spoke to me, and so I've risen up the ranks, and for the last 3 years I've been honored to be the president of the Board of Trustees. And going through the pandemic was just, an amazing experience. Thank God we did really some amazing stuff with it. But it took my financial background, it took my analysis background, it took the ability of working with people and making sure they're maximizing their efforts, and it all came together so nicely. But it was sort of a combination of investment experience, analysis, to do things, and I love fundraising. It was, so we do a lot of fundraising. But I'd say, last year in 2021, our foundation, while we managed hundreds of millions, the grants came out of it. There were over $40 million in grants that were sent out. And some of these are, if you have a donor advised fund, which is something I highly recommend you have, to your college, to your church, to your temple, or to a social services organization. During COVID, we responded and gave out special grants. We made sure that people were safe. The dollars really do make a difference. We helped schools reopen. A lot of different kind of schools. We have inside the JCF, we have an organization that is focused on senior care. It's religion blind, it's need blind. And so we do a lot of good things. More recently with the Ukrainian, the invasion by Russia in Ukraine, we have an unrestricted fund. We gave out $50,000 to go along with what the Jewish community raised, which is like more than $4 million now. And that's to send money to help the refugees coming out or to help the people inside the Ukraine. And then locally, we were approached by a Ukrainian organization that had 5 containers of material, but they needed some help to ship it. And we gave them $52,000 out of our foundation to get those 5 containers on a ship and over to the Ukraine. So it's, it makes me feel good. It leverages my experience and my skill set. And it really builds for the future, which is another really important thing. I really believe that we have to, prepare ourselves for the future. And having endowments is something I'm a big believer in, whether it's an endowment for a social services organization or an endowment for a school, or an endowment, for our Jewish Federation, so that the annual grants that they make can continue.
Right, that's wonderful. So for the listeners, if they want to reach out to this wonderful organization, do you have a website? How would they reach you guys?
Yeah, so our website, I gotta just look it up, and it's, you get used to all these, your browsers, they know what it is. So it's jcfgmw.org. jcfgmw.org.
Wonderful. So, from what I understand, there are so many wonderful people in this foundation, the Jewish Community Foundation. What's it like to have so many really talented people thinking the same way about strengthening their community? What is that like, Steve, to use your vast skills? And once again, obviously you have extraordinary talent in the financial world. What's it like to see that team come together towards a common bond and goal?
So I'm going to tell you one story that I think exemplifies this. First of all, we have 18 professionals. Right, so those are people who are paid to do this. We obviously don't pay them enough. So, there's a little bit of them saying, okay, I'm going to work for less than market to do this because it's inspirational. I have about 45 volunteers on the board of trustees, and they come with skill sets in finance, in legal, or in education. So the Jewish community in Newark was huge at one point. Very, very small. I think there was something like 50 synagogues as one measure, and I think we're down to one active synagogue. But going way, way back, there were a lot of Jews who lived there, and there were cemeteries. So there were about 60,000 Jewish graves in 5 different cemeteries. And for a long time, these cemeteries were abandoned. They just didn't have the money to take care of it. So our foundation actually raised a lot of money to put fences up, to make them secure, to pick up the headstones, to remove trees that grew right over headstones. And so we have inside our JCF a little foundation that is now set up, and very shortly we'll have all the money it needs for perpetual care ad infinitum to show the respect for these people. One of our professionals sort of led this charge. And she's there. She's our chief counsel. This is not her main job, right? So she did this because of the respect she has for this. And then we have a bunch of volunteers who've also done this. And it's just great because when you call them up and say, I need you to look over this document, and they turn it around really fast, and they'll do it pro bono. So just having the skill set. And when we look for new board members, we try and, just like I do on my corporate board, we make sure we have the right mixture. We want people to work together. Everyone has to work on a committee. And so that's just one example of, the work we've done to set up these cemeteries so that they are well taken care of. People can visit their loved ones, down there, pay their respects, and do it safely and conveniently.
Yeah. We were talking once again in advance about, these people passed. They can't say thank you back. Why is that so important to you, Steve, and your organization?
Yeah, when you look at the, this is certainly the Jewish religion, and I don't know enough about other religions, but they say one of the greatest mitzvahs or good deeds you can do is for somebody who can't say thank you, right? So it's clearly somebody who's, dead and buried, there's no way they can say thank you. And they might not even have a family member who can say thank you. So to do something like that, and to give back, knowing that there's nobody who can say thank you. You can go and you can hand out food in a food bank, and people come in and they'll say thank you. And it's a wonderful thing. And we do that as well. But to do that for somebody who can't say thank you just raises it up a notch or two.
It's a beautiful thing. I mean, when we were talking about it, it was striking to me because it really does incorporate the values of the Jewish Community Foundation. So there's a lot of different programs the foundation offers. Education is also really front and center in terms of making sure folks can get a great quality education. Why is that so important? Where do you think the benefit is for the community? Because once again, this is a community-based show. Why we do these shows is to put the spotlight on really great organizations.
Right. So in our community, we have 4 Jewish day schools, and there are about 2,100 students and about 1,400 families that are sending their kids there. All 4 of them are a little different. The one school that I actually currently sit on the board of, and I serve as treasurer because I have the time and the skills, is the Gottesman Academy in Randolph. About 170 kids. It's what we call a community day school, so it reflects the community. It's not just Orthodox or conservative or Reform, but we embrace and celebrate, not just embrace, we celebrate the culture of all of our families. We try to teach these children, especially at the Gottesman Academy, to respect everybody, regardless of their background, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish. When we teach, we incorporate these Jewish values into math. So, Martin Luther King Day, we use that as an opportunity, not just to teach about Martin Luther King, but to build in some of the Jewish values. And there were a lot of, Jews who marched with Dr. King, and, a lot of similar values. So, teaching these children these values is going to help them to grow up, and all 4 of our schools are like that. Yes, we are very accomplished. The students from all 4 of these schools go on to the best colleges in the world, and they go on to be, some of them might be rabbis, but some of them go on to be teachers, and some of them go on to be, we have actually coming out of the Gottesman Academy, we have a nominee for the Supreme Court of New Jersey. And we're proud of her, just like we're proud of, we have one of my son's best friends is a rock star. He's a drummer. I mean, and you know what? He expresses himself, but he remembers and he comes back. And yes, we have our dentists and we have our doctors and, just like everybody else, and our lawyers, of course. But it's the teachers and it's the people who go on to then turn around and become leaders in the Jewish community or in other volunteer positions that we really love the most.
So one of the things that I know you're involved in managing a huge amount of money for these endowments. And I realize, and once again, thank you I know the world right now in the financial world is so volatile. And, I would be remiss, Steve, because everybody's worried about their 401k and where all that money's going down the drain. Is it going to bounce back? Do they jump off like the Titanic sinking? What's your thoughts, just in terms of, it's just a general piece of advice, because you were on Wall Street during the bubble and, the world is always kind of changing. What are your thoughts, generally speaking, for the listeners with Wall Street right now? That easy.
So, when I was working, I used to go on CNBC and, the Wall Street Journal and Fox News. It was, they'd ask me about a stock or, I had to be really careful about what I said. So let me just say this much. The kind of money that we manage is there for the long term. These are endowments. So, what we do is we sort of model a 5% drawdown for a lot of these. Now, some of these, like the donor advised funds, someone could put $100,000 in and grant out $90,000 the next year, right? So if your time horizon is short, we have an investment vehicle. It's probably, fixed income or just money markets. But for the ones that are looking to put a few $1 million into an endowment, and which is most of the kind of clients that we have, this is, we had an amazing run for 2 years. And now we're in a correction. So, if I put my Wall Street hat on, this is a correction. It happens. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know exactly where the bottom is, but if your time horizon is long, I mean, I wouldn't change anything. It's not a bad time to just go back and make sure that, everything is, it's good. Review your policies, not your policies, your funds with your investment advisor. But most of what we do are longer term. And over the long term, the kind of investments, we have a very diverse set of investments. So we do real estate, we have some private equity, and this is where our investment managers really help us, because they have connections and we get into these really good funds. But we also have a lot of stocks and bonds. But I would just say be patient. There's no reason to panic here, especially if you're longer term. It kind of depends upon what your time horizon is. So did I walk around the answer well enough now?
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but my friends would be kicking me because the Wizard of Wall Street. I was just curious to get your view of it, since I don't care who you are. If you have money in the market, you're obviously concerned about how it's performing, and is it at the bottom? Can it go any lower? When is it going to bounce back? And obviously you gave us some great advice about
I will tell you this, Todd. One of the things I learned on Wall Street is, just when you think things have gotten really high, they can go a lot higher. And just when you think we've hit the bottom, they can go lower. Right. But at some point, there's usually an inflection point, and, you can go back and, look in 2008. The thing crashed really, really fast. Same thing happened, as soon as the pandemic hit. It crashed and then it turned around really fast. But it usually needs an event like that. And I'm not smart enough to tell you what the Federal Reserve is going to do with their interest rates. But we had an amazing 10 years or more of just really silly low interest rates. So,
right. Yeah. I know
we're adjusting.
Shockwaves, with Chairman Powell, but that's part of the economy. So the Jewish Community Foundation, there's some other things when I was getting ready for the show about repairing the world. What does that mean to your organization?
It's not a good thing if you're only focused on one organization and what they do. If you don't look at the entire world, we are in a community, and it's not just this part of New Jersey that we're concerned about, but it's the rest of it. So the work we're doing to help refugees in the Ukraine, not just Jewish refugees, but other refugees, we're supporting organizations that are sitting at the border. The Hebrew Free Loan Society, the HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigration Association. When immigrants came in, they didn't ask if they were Jewish or not. They just wanted to help them. And so as people came over the border, and one of my colleagues, who's the president of the foundation, was actually there, and he told me about this. People just walked across, and there were all these tents, and they just went, and nobody asked them questions. They said, how can we help you? So if the world is broken in certain places, it's broken, right? So the more we can fix, the better off we are. Puerto Rico. The one thing I'm surprised we've gotten this far, and you haven't mentioned that in my free time I also do some investments like in Broadway, so I've been involved with a show. You're going to build?
Yeah, I got to build to that. But,
all right, then I'll save that story. But, just repairing the world. Let's just say we went down to Puerto Rico, and we can come back to this for another reason. But while we were down there, this is with another 6 of my wife and another 6 members of our community. It was a year and change after Hurricane Maria. And, we said, okay, we can't just go down there to see this show, Hamilton, but we need to go down. And so we spent a day fixing a roof. We spent another day helping this tiny village out in the middle of nowhere get a water solution because they can't rely on power anymore. So it was gravity-fed water filtration. So this is all in, the space of 48 hours that we're in Puerto Rico. We needed, it's in our mentality, it's in our culture to give back and to repair the world.
So we talked obviously about the mission of the Jewish Community Foundation, and one of the things that also was really, really beautiful is performing acts of kindness and compassion. And this show is always about people that are compassionate and really kind. Why is that important to the Jewish Community Foundation?
So it's a basic Jewish value. I could certainly go into the Hebrew part of this, but it's a core value. It's what we teach in our schools. It's what we talk about in our synagogues, as I think many religions do. I think all religions talk about that. But we also like to put it into action. So, doing acts of kindness, one thing will lead to another. And, you've seen all these stories on social media where, you give back. So someone prevents somebody from walking across the street. I mean, you've seen these videos, and then they do something, and a door from close, a little thing, opening up a door, right? Getting up if there's a senior who gets on to a bus or a train, stand up and, give that person the opportunity. It's these little things that pay back big rewards. And if you model that behavior, especially for little kids, and then they become teenagers, and whatever their inclination is, to act very quickly, in their heads, they say, well, wait a minute, I saw my dad, or I saw my uncle, or I saw my father's friend do this. You model that behavior. It really does make the world a better place.
So we're going to now talk about Broadway, and you and your son started a company a number of years ago. What's that company called, Steve?
So we started our own little investment firm called Toyncoss Capital, and we went with Toyncoss. My son is severely dyslexic. I mean, he's almost 32, and he's very successful. But, with dyslexia, you sometimes flip things around. So, Toyncoss is called a spoonerism. Right? You can look that one up. But
for the listeners, I was Googling spoonerism because that Steven was like, it's a spoonerism. It doesn't come up. It's not my nomenclature.
Right. Yeah. So spoonerism, right? So Toyncoss Capital. And what we do is we invest in venture capital, and we also have entertainment investments. I was introduced before he graduated college to the world of Broadway. Very risky area to invest, but we've been fortunate, and we've invested in some great shows. We got to work with a producer who's, really given Lin-Manuel Miranda his launch. That's Jeffrey Seller, and so we were in The Heights, a few other shows, and then along came Hamilton, and it's been very, very successful and financially. But I'll tell you, it's a fascinating thing to see how Hamilton and the use of the music has penetrated American education curriculum. There are so many high schools and maybe even middle schools that are using Hamilton to teach American history. And sometimes it involves going to see the show, and there are a lot of shows traveling around the country. And it's just fascinating to me to see how these American history teachers have embraced this modern culture to go back and talk about things like, who ever wanted to talk about, the American Revolution and the battle, and, where this little thing came up that said that you have to be a American born. You have to be born in the United States. Well, they did it because of Alexander Hamilton, because he was born in the Caribbean. They didn't want him to be president. And the fight to create the financial system, that Thomas Jefferson and James Madison said, no. And the South said no. And Hamilton said yes, and he won. So it's really, it's been great to see how that gave back, right? And I think the work that Lynn has done because of the money he's made from this, he has an amazing foundation that does incredible work to bring arts. I mentioned something about this Puerto Rico trip. So he, after, 2 years of not being in the show, he was committed to bring the show to Puerto Rico, which is where his family is from. And the producers and everybody who had a right to any profits from that show donated it back, and they raised more than $15 million in the space of 3 weeks to give back and establish a fund for the arts and culture in Puerto Rico. And it was just an amazing experience to go down there. He's treated appropriately as royalty in Puerto Rico. His father and mother are from Puerto Rico, and his grandmother, I think, is still there. But it was just great to get back.
So, Steve, obviously Hamilton may go down as, obviously maybe the greatest, Broadway show. I mean, it certainly sounds like it's on that track. Did you know as an investor that was like lightning in a bottle? I mean, was it something just like you felt it, or it's just like blind luck? No disrespect, but
yeah, no. I mean, listen, we invested in Broadway, and I love Broadway. I was in, shows when I was in high school. I was in college. My wife and I love going to see shows. But I will tell you, the first few years I was investing, it was like, oh, this is a good show. And, I didn't know what was going to be successful. I've learned. But I invested in a bunch. And, I would just say anyone who's interested in investing in Broadway, you have to understand there are going to be big losses. And so we had just come away from 2 really big losses. And I said, it's okay. I don't need to do this for a living. And then I went to see the workshop for Hamilton. And so to answer your question directly, Todd, through the first act, I came out and sent my son a message that said, holy something, this Lin-Manuel is a genius. And I went up to the producer and I said, I want double my normal position. He said, you'll be lucky to get your normal position. So I knew this was going to be a huge winner. I don't think anybody predicted it would be as big. I mean, there's a show in London, there's a show in Melbourne, Australia. It's being translated into German for Germany. It's huge, and I think the one on Broadway will be really successful for a long time. And much to the credit of the producers, they're not just sitting back. They're bringing in high school students, once a month. This is what's been going on, certainly before the pandemic. Every city they go to, they use this as an educational opportunity. Yeah, it's a wonderful show, as you were highlighting, just how it's changing the world, really. It's beyond fascinating how a show is now part of like curriculums, and it's really a wonderful lesson, because some of the young kids don't really know too much about history. Now they're actually opening their eyes to an important part of obviously where we started, right, as a country. So you talked about something too, which is interesting, is there was adversity. I'll go back to the Broadway shows, right? Yet you invested in 2 shows, and they obviously didn't pan out as an investor. But it seemed like you were confident with the concept. You're going to stay with it. Where do you think you got that from, Steven? I think I'm just secure. It helps. I'm financially secure. I can't write $100 million check to anybody, but, I'm comfortable, right? And I know I'm comfortable, and I know a lot of people aren't that way. But I was also confident in my business analysis, if you will. So on the finance side, I've done my job as a parent, and I have 3 amazing kids, 3 grandchildren who are on their way to becoming amazing. And I know that because of some of the things that they do and, how they respect other people. And I'm willing to take some risks, but I also know that you don't do crazy risks. So that's a good segue, because I know also when we were golfing, you mentioned about a zip line that you built, you and your son, a zip line in the backyard of your place. And I'm just curious. I was at a birthday party yesterday. Our kids are too young to do the zip line, but I'm like, that looks a little bit risky, to use the phrase risk. What's that like? Do you ever do the zip line? So the answer is yes, I have done the zip line. It's about 75 feet long. During the first summer of COVID, my son was home, my daughter was home, and my grandchildren were with us. They were inside our bubble, to use the vernacular from that days, and they couldn't go to camp. So we built a treehouse. And that was pretty much it. We built a treehouse. Well, as long as you're building a treehouse, you might as well build a zip line, right? And so it was this amazing project that I did with my son, and I will freely say, just in case he ever listens to this, he built it and I helped him, right? And it was a great project to work on. And the zip line was there. It was a harrowing moment to put one of the connections up to the top of the tree there, but there was a lot of interesting thought that went into it, and yes, so I have been on it once, but the kids come over every once in a while, and so we're going to be concluding this wonderful show. Steve, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your journey with us. It means the world to me that you took time out of your busy day, and how important time is for you, but you really shared a lot of great, beautiful insights into your humanity, the Jewish Community Foundation, over a half a century, strengthening the community. And once again, as Steven says, he uses his gifts to help others. We all have gifts in this world.
Remember, we're in this together. We can all make a difference for the better. I want you to enjoy the rest of this beautiful weather today. Please tune in next Sunday, and God bless you.
Thank you.
The Todd Leonard Show is sponsored by the Leonard Foundation, whose mission is to support the children and families who are battling pediatric cancer and those in need of food and assistance, women's shelters, and other important social services in the community. They also proudly support those fighting pancreatic cancer. They feel it's vitally important to help those in need in our amazing community when they need us the most. Please join them in extending a helping hand and go to leonardcharity.org and donate now. Together, we can touch many lives.